Some Warframes are exceptionally resilient. Whether through armor or abilities, they are unmoving bastions of defense, holding line against all foes. Saryn is not one of these. She's the kind of Warframe to rock up to a battle with a tattered band t-shirt and an AK that fires Ebola. Her entire plan is don't get hit, kill them first. So how do you use this walking plague? I'm the Engineer, let's solve a practical problem. You can obtain Saryn 4 different ways. The Star Chart way is by assassinating Kelly to Tame over and over until you get the component pieces. Accessing this assassination means both reaching Sedna and completing the arena missions to earn enough points to face her, requiring 25 to enter but only actually costing 12 points to complete the mission. While you're at it, pick up an extra Saryn systems to build Chroma if you haven't already. With her parts obtained, grab the blueprint from the market for credits. The Circuit way is available only for 1 week in every 11 currently. She'll be back in rotation on March 25th for a week, then after that June 10th. If you happen to be farming for her then, select her in the normal mode Circuit in Diviri like any frame and reach at least tier 8 to obtain all the parts. Tier 10 will give you the main blueprint too, but then you can just get that from the market. The Prime way will be to crack open her relics. She may have just slipped out of Prime Resurgence if you're watching this on release, which means you can't farm the relics right now though. Only open them if you have them or trade for them, which leaves the final option, Platinum. Whether you buy the base frame from the market for Platinum or buy the Prime parts from other players to construct her Prime, this is the absolute fastest method to get her and always available. Once obtained, Saryn's kit has the standard passive and 4 active abilities. Her passive extends the duration of all status effects she causes by 25%. For non-damaging status effects, that's the entire story, making things like Impact last 7.5 seconds instead of 6, or Corrosive lasting 10 seconds instead of 8. The damaging status effects, while the duration goes up by 25%, the actual output changes based on the effect type. For Slash, Toxin and Heat, which all deal damage at the end of every second they've been applied, their duration goes from 6 seconds to 7.5 seconds, granting only 1 extra tick of damage. The 8th tick would happen on the 8-second mark, but the status has run out by that point. For both electric and gas, however, they deal damage at the start of each second. With a 7.5 second status duration, these two would deal damage 8 times, up from 6. So with no other adjustments to status duration, AoE damaging effects land 33% more hits, single target effects land 16% more, and non-damaging effects just last 25% longer, as advertised. Saryn's active abilities all incorporate this passive in various ways. Her first is her Spores ability. This infects a target you aim at with 3 persistent corrosive growths, dealing damage every second. While Spores is active on at least 1 enemy, the damage it deals per growth scales up over time based on the number of infected enemies. While Spores is not active on an enemy, Spores rapidly loses the accumulated damage. Strength and duration can mitigate this loss, but it's still best avoided. Active Spores on an enemy will spread their effects to all other enemies in range when struck by a weapon, and also when the infected enemy dies in most cases. The only exception is if the enemy was not the initial target of Spores, dies due to Spores damage, and is not under the effect of Saryn's Miasma ability. Then, and only then, will the Spores not spread on death. Every other case, enemies in range will receive 1 Spore for each burst up to 3 Spores per target, and continue the plague, scaling the damage and littering your screen with damage numbers. Spores also have a chance to apply the Corrosive status effect every damage tick, starting at 50% and modified by strength. In combination with the Emerald Archon shards, this can lead to a total armor strip with enough strength, spreading and time. It's plenty achievable and worth slotting the shards, but you do need to actually mod and play to make it happen. Base stats alone will not give endless free armor stripping. Saryn's second ability is Molt. Saryn creates a hollow toxic decoy of herself to draw enemy fire, shedding it like a snakeskin and cleansing herself of negative status effects in the process. This is an instant cast ability with no animation, meaning you can do it at pretty much any time without issue. Well, if you have the energy of course. Having shed her skin, Saryn gets a brief speed boost while the decoy gets a brief invulnerability window, absorbing damage to increase its health pool. After that, the decoy remains until it's either killed, recast or times out. In all 3 cases, the decoy explodes in a modest range for a small amount of toxin damage and guaranteed toxin status. This toxin does also trigger the mod Archon Continuity for a corrosive status. Molt is Saryn's core defensive ability, not just for the functions it provides, but also as a perfect source of shield gating potential. With just brief respite in gaslighting shields equipped, this ability will fully restore Saryn's shield gate in an instant, at the cost of having an otherwise useless shield hit point pool. Without catalyzing shields, it's still a source of instant shields with a conversion mod equipped. Saryn's third ability is Toxic Lash. This is a damage boosting ability by making your weapons apply a second hit of pure toxin with every hit you land. As it's a second hit, this toxin does not combine with any other elements on your weapon, allowing, for example, heat and toxin side by side. Toxic Lash at base applies 30% toxin, or 60% for melee, modified by your strength and landing a guaranteed toxin status effect. The toxin status from Toxic Lash is affected by your weapon's toxin mod, the duration by status duration mods on the weapon as well as Saryn's passive, and the damage of both the hit and status are affected by faction mods. In short, this could be a surprisingly powerful damage enhancement when modded for, bypassing both elemental restrictions and shield hit points. Unfortunately, the toxin status all counts as being from your weapons, so Arc and Continuity doesn't trigger from it. Toxic Lash has a further effect when used to attack an enemy infected with spores. Every hit on an enemy, regardless of if it hits a spore or not, will cause its spores to spread. This allows you to recklessly mow down enemies and spread the plague at once without needing to rely on kills or precision to make spreading happen. Lastly then is Saryn's fourth, Miasma. This unleashes a room-wide blast of viral damage, stunning most units and applying both viral status and dealing damage over time. There is no damage fall-off, no line of sight restriction, just pure plague. What's more, the damage is quadrupled on enemies infected with spores and makes them eligible to spread the spores effect on death even if they die to the spores damage while the miasma racks them. It is this ability which takes Saryn from a damage powerhouse into a bionuclear propagator. Keeping enemies under this effect with a high range will ensure a constant outpouring of damage and spores, all while crowd controlling them too to reduce the threat to Saryn. Also, for some reason, both Toxic Lash and Miasma cost less to cast than typical 3rd and 4th abilities, making it even easier to maintain Saryn's output. With this kit combined, you can take Saryn in various directions. She can be a total weapons platform, buffing your elemental damage to absurd levels and allowing you to either use more niche elements or just focus on another crucial stat. She can be a full caster, setting out a continuous devastating plague as a true horseman of the apocalypse. Or you can straddle the middle, using her abilities both to sunder enemies and buff your weapons at once. All three approaches need different modding setups and deal with differently leveled enemies. Let's start with the full caster. This is tried and tested, a well-known staple of devastation in both Sanctuary Onslaught and Elite Sanctuary Onslaught especially. Normal Sanctuary Onslaught, there is no limit to how often you can cast abilities, so a setup like this, where we can cast often and cheaply, works well. Infect one enemy with spores, spread it, then keep the plague up with cast of Miasma every few seconds. The high efficiency makes this plenty manageable with a single energy income source, such as Arcane Energize. You'll likely find that on larger tiles or in the earlier zones, the enemies might die out before new ones spawn, so be ready to quickly recast spores. In Elite Sanctuary Onslaught, we can't be so wild with our casting, as Samaris will disable Miasma for 15 seconds if used twice within 10 seconds. To work with this, we can trade out a little range and our efficiency for a much higher duration. With a higher duration, Miasma lasts much longer and is therefore more likely to be able to force an enemy to spread the spores without you needing to cast as much. In ideal circumstances, you can hold out the full duration before recasting, never hitting the casting cap Samaris imposes. Couple this with a good weapon to help kill enemies and spread the plague even more while Miasma does its general work. Subsume Raw is a general buff to this approach, supporting you and your allies. There are a couple downsides to this. In normal Sanctuary Onslaught, you may find yourself in a tile where enemies spawn at a distance and simply not often enough to allow spores to keep spreading. This can cause significant drops in your spores damage. In an Elite Sanctuary Onslaught, there's no visible timer on the Miasma ability to know when the 10 seconds of safety pass to recast it. You can refer to the round timer instead to help keep track. Again, if you do happen to cast it too soon, at least the higher duration means the downtime won't be too bad. But most problematic of all is nothing to do with enemy spawns or Samaris rules. The worst downside is that you could end up in a squad with another Saryn. Saryn has anti-synergy with herself in that only one Saryn can infect an enemy at a time. With another Saryn in the squad using spores, your spores will have fewer targets to spread to, and likewise your spores will block theirs. Both of you will likely end up with your spores getting shut down and decaying due to this. If you're rocking a Saryn and there's another random player in the group with one, the best thing you can do is to simply not use your spores and either lay low or leave at the round's end. Now these are full caster setups. If we swing the entire other way into a gunplay focus setup, we can utilise the Spores augment to add corrosive to our weapons, and the subsumed ability Nourish to add viral to our weapons. Combine this with Toxic Lash, and that's a triple dose of destructive elemental forces. Some people are good at surviving with a shield gate and enjoy that kind of survival strategy. I personally prefer a defense that doesn't crack if you so much as sneeze. For that reason, I've combined the high strength, high duration setup for these buffing abilities with a strong shield tank approach. Primed redirection and adaptation provides the core resilience. Arcane Aegis is intermittent near immortality, and brief respite allows for partial shield gates through casting when the shield breaks completely. This is vulnerable to very high damage scenarios, which is why I recommend doing what Saryn does best and kill everything before it becomes a very high damage scenario. Nourish I've subsumed over Miasma as the frankly superior choice for both viral output and sustain, allowing us to keep Molt for defense. If you're confident with just shield gating for tank, drop redirection and adaptation for catalyzing shields, turning 1036 shield hit points into just 74. From here, you could slightly hybridize the build by downranking Narrow-Minded and adding Stretch to bring up your range, allowing Spores to be used and spread again. Alternatively, keep the low range and use Rolling Guard for an additional defense, or throw in even more strength on if 254% is still too low for your taste. But for a full hybrid setup, I've settled on this build here. This utilizes all of Saryn's kit, allowing for a combination of Spores and Miasma, Molt shedding, general gunplay, and heavy shield tanking to make Saryn as resilient as reasonably possible. Again, you can adjust the tank to your satisfaction, be that reducing it for lower level missions, or if you're happy relying on action intensity, or increasing defense by swapping out Venom Dose for Rolling Guard. Regardless of little adjustments, this straddles the middle between the other builds. It won't be as boost heavy as the full weapons platform setup, nor as much a casting powerhouse, but an all-rounder. For all of these builds so far, 2 Emerald Shards to increase corrosive status cap, and 1 Amber Shard for starting energy can be a huge benefit, with the other 2 slots down to your preference. If you're not as well established, you can downgrade your hybrid build as much as this. It's weaker, and I've dropped the range in favour of Rolling Guard to add more defense. If you're not at the point where you can earn these mods, you can still trade for them. With the Arcanes, you can get away with just a rank 0 Arcane Aegis, as it has the same chance to trigger, it just doesn't restore your shields as much. It'll still provide a 12 seconds near invulnerability period when activated. Where these setups can get a little ridiculous is in combination with the new melee arcane, Melee Influence. This can be used in all manner of ways and places, but Saryn has that double combo of optionally adding pure corrosive to her weapons and adding a second toxin hit as a weapon attack. Melee Influence requires electric procs to work, which normally can't exist alongside toxin and corrosive. Using the hybrid setup, we can have a viral electric weapon with additional corrosive and toxin, pushing out 4 different powerful elemental status procs on a single weapon, and through Melee Influence, out to all nearby enemies. In further combination with the Emerald Archon Shards, this can fully armor strip enemies, make them vulnerable to taking more health damage, and then annihilate them with an electric and toxin combo, which has the added benefit of also bypassing shields. Regardless of the faction, that's a lot of damage spreading. Combine this with the Spores and Miasma abilities to completely overwhelm groups of enemies easily. Saryn is an absolute powerhouse of damage output, made even stronger with the newest buffs added to the game. While her tank remains questionable, her ability to kill enemies before they can test that tank is still one of the best in the game in various tiers of play. If you want to see more powerful frames and builds in action, come join me live over on Twitch with the link in the video description, or join the community on Discord too. That's all from me for now though, so as always, spread spores, plague hordes, and fight well, Tenno.